Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the online lecture on linear control systems. Today we are going to continue our discussion on the review of the linear control systems course, and this is the second part of the review, which will be comprising of 4 parts. So last time we discussed the differential equation, state space and transfer function as the ways to mathematically model linear control systems, and we also looked at how we can linearize a nonlinear system. And today we are going to continue our discussion with the further elaboration in the mathematical modeling. So mathematical modeling of different components within the control systems. You already know that control system at least should have 2 components in it. One component is the plant whose output is to be controlled, and the other component is the controller that is used to control the output of the plant. But there are in fact more than these 2 components. In reality there is at least 2 more components, which are actuator and sensors. Sensors are used to measure the plant output and feed it back to the controller, and actuators are used to apply the force calculated by the controller onto the plant. So plant modeling is done in 3 different ways, where one is the modeling with first principle, and the second one is phenomenological modeling, and the third one is system identification. In modeling with first principle, you basically use the basic laws of physics like Ohm's law, Kirchhoff current law, Kirchhoff voltage law, Newton's law of motion, and other such first principles in order to formulate the differential equations that govern the behavior of the plant, and then you can convert those differential equations into state space or transfer function as required. In phenomenological modeling, this type of modeling is used when no first principles are applicable to the behavior of the model. For example, if your system is an electric circuit or a moving vehicle, then it is easy to use first principles. But if your system is something like spread of an epidemic disease, or if your system is something like the population study or some economical studies, then probably there might not be the laws of physics governing those systems, but there are some other insights that you can use, the phenomena of the system that you can use in order to model the dynamics of the system, the rate of change of different variables within the system. Similarly, system identification is a laboratory method of determining the transfer function or mathematical model for a system. In this method, you perform laboratory experiments, apply standard inputs to the system, and calculate the corresponding outputs. And then from the data of the input and the output, you can learn the model of the system, either by using the deep learning or neural networks, or you can also use the methods such as curve fitting and regression and other methods that can help you in converting the data points into some sort of a transfer function or a differential equation. Okay, so next is the modeling of the sensors. Sensors can be modeled as a constant. So ideal sensor will be modeled as a constant 1. 1 means that whatever the output is, sensor is giving it back to the system as it is. Or if the constant is not 1, that it means that sensor is giving some value which is proportional to the actual physical quantity, but it is not exactly equal to that quantity. For example, a sensor could give you some voltage value in response to pressure measured at the input of the sensor. So a pressure sensor could give you voltage at its output, and that voltage will be some proportionality constant multiplication of the actual value of the pressure. Similarly, a temperature sensor can give you voltage at the output. So in that case, the model of the sensor would be constant value, where the sensor is giving you instantaneous reading. Sometimes the sensor give you delayed reading. For example, you apply the physical input on the sensor, and after taking some time, sensor gives you the value of the physical quantity. In that case, the sensors can be modeled as a first order transfer function. And then next is the second order transfer function model of the sensor. These types of sensors give you reading after some transients. So whenever some physical quantity is applied to the sensor, then sensor tries to track the exact value of the quantity. In that process, sensor sometimes overshoots and then undershoots, and then it settles down to the value of the physical output. An example of this type of sensor would be an analog weighing scale. If you stand up on the analog weighing scale, its needle will fluctuate a little bit, and then after some time it will settle down to some constant value of your weight. Then there is a saturation or dead zone and discrete steps. These are not models of the sensor. These are sort of like the phenomena that occur in the sensor which affect the kind of model that we can use for the sensor. So the sensor having a saturation, if you want to use a linear model for this type of sensor, then it can only be used in a certain limits, in a certain local region around the origin. Similarly, dead zone is a phenomena where sensors give you zero reading for very small magnitude inputs, and the discrete steps means that the sensors can only measure something in discrete steps. It cannot measure a quantity in a continuous manner. By the way, an example of a sensor which give you a delayed reading is a tachometer or a speedometer, which you apply the speed to it and it gradually goes up to the actual speed that is being applied to the input of the speedometer or tachometer. Okay. Then there is modeling of actuators. Actuators are mostly, in most cases, especially for electrical engineers, the actuators are DC or AC motors, and the transfer functions of DC or AC motors have been discussed in the course. These are transfer functions where the output of the motor is the angle. So the transfer function between angle of the motor and the field voltage applied to the motor, this is the transfer function of field controlled motor. And you can see that there is a rotor inertia involved, there are some constants of the motor, and there is a inductance of the field winding and the resistance of the field winding. And similarly for armature controlled motor, there are some rotor inertia, similar constants, the inductance of the armature winding, the resistance of the armature winding, the constants related to the back EMF, and so on. So these are the different modeling techniques that you can use to model different components within the control systems. Excuse me. So next is the modeling of controllers. So in terms of controllers, there are different types of controllers that we study in this course. For example, the proportional controller or P controller, which is the simplest type of controller discussed in this course. It can be modeled by a constant value or a constant gain Kp, and in time domain, the control input that corresponds to P controller is, in the feedback control, it is the constant gain Kp applied to the error between the actual and the desired value of the output. So this is the desired value and this is the actual value. The difference between actual and desired value is multiplied with the control gain, and the control input is applied to the plant until this difference becomes zero. If Yd is greater than y, which means that y is less than y desired, then positive force is applied, and if y becomes greater than y desired, then the force is applied automatically in the opposite direction. So this is feedback control with proportional gain. Next we have PD controller. In PD controller, the transfer function of the controller is Kp plus Kd times S. So in this controller we have a 0 in the controller, and in terms of time domain, the control input that is applied corresponding to the PD controller is constant gain multiplied with the error plus another constant gain, the derivative gain, which is applied to the derivative of the error or rate of change of the error. You can see here that the PD controller basically not only works on the error itself, but it also works on the rate of change of the error. Higher the rate of change of the error, higher will be this KD gain, and lesser the rate of change of error, lesser will be the this term. So the effect of this term will be higher when the rate of change of error is high, and lower when the rate of change of error is low. I have discussed the effect of PD controller in detail when we discussed this controller in the class, and you probably remember that actually what happens is that in the beginning the error is large, so KP acts on the error in a with higher amount of force, and then when this term kicks in, then the rate of change of error increases, and this term also comes into play. And but what is happening is the error is decreasing, so this term is decreasing the error, so rate of change of error is in the opposite direction to the error itself. So in this case, this KD term will actually try to slow down the process and try to prevent the overshoot. This type of controller works in that way. So it could be misleading in some way that if one gain is acting on the error, the other gain is acting on the rate of change of error, then there is a huge input applied to the system. That is not the case. Actually, when this term is trying to reduce the error is reducing, which means rate of change of error is negative. So this term tries to keep the progress of the plant dynamics in check. So alright, so next is PI controller, where the transfer function of the control is Kp plus Ki over S, and here the effect is that one gain is acting on the error and the other gain is acting on the integral value of the error. This PI controller is used to remove the steady state error, because if there is even a small steady state error, its integral will become large enough with the passage of time, so that this gain will act on the system and it will make the steady state error go to zero. You can also prove this mathematically. We have done this, and also we know that this PI controller increases the type of the system, which we study later in the steady state error analysis part of this course. And so we know that PI controller can at least get rid of the steady state error with respect to step input and reduce the steady state error with respect to ramp input. So PID controller is the combination of proportional, derivative and integral part, and here the control input in response to this type of controller is a proportional effort, the derivative effort and the integral effort, all three combined. And we can use this controller for general design for making the plant behave in a way that we want it to behave. Then there is some parallel nomenclature for the controllers. Phase lead compensator, which is equivalent or alternate of the PD controller. In this controller there is a pole and a zero. So pole is leading the zero in terms of in the left half plane. Pole is farther away on the left half plane compared to the zero, and hence this controller has an effect equivalent to a PD controller, but this controller is not non-causal. PD controller is a non-causal controller because the degree of numerator in a PD controller is 1 and the degree of denominator is 0, which is less than 1. This is not strictly causal, but at least it is causal. Phase lag compensator is an alternate of PI controller, where the zero is farther on the left hand side compared to the pole, and then there is lead lag compensator, where there is one part of the lead lag compensator is acting as a lead compensator and the other part is acting as a lag compensator. This is an alternate of PID controller. Once again, this is a causal controller as opposed to non-causal PID controller. Alright, so these are the different models of the controllers that we can use in this course, and then there is higher order controllers, where PDD controller. In a PDD controller, the transfer function would be Kp plus Kd1s and Kd2s square. So this is a common mistake that a student could make, that in a PDD controller they could have two derivative gains where Kd1s and Kd2s. Kd2s is not the right way, because in that case Kd1 plus Kd2 can be called a Kd and s can be taken as a common, so it will still be a PD controller. If you want a PDD controller, then the second derivative will be second term of the derivative part is with s square, and that will act on the second derivative of the error. This will act on the first derivative of the error. Then there is PII controller, which is Kp plus Ki over s and Ki2 over s square. So this is again important, that if you want to have double integral control, then this second part of the gain should have a double integral part or 1 over s square part. So PDDI controller, similarly we can construct any type of controller. If there is a PDDI controller, then the second D will be with the s square, and since there is only one I part, so it will be only with 1 over s. And this is all about the models of the controllers. And next we move on to the next topic that we have discussed in this course, which is stability of LTI systems. Stability of LTI systems, we discussed the BIBO stability, which is by bounded input bounded output stability. Its definition is that for a bounded input, the input whose magnitude is bounded by some finite number m, it always leads to a bounded output. So the magnitude of the output can be different from the magnitude of the input, but for any bounded input, the output should always be bounded. So there should not be an unbounded output in response to any bounded input. That is the requirement for BIBO stability. And for LTI systems, the BIBO stability can be determined from the integration of the impulse response. So if you integrate the magnitude of the impulse response from 0 to infinity, and if this integral turns out to be finite, then it means that the system is BIBO stable. And this impulse response is basically Laplace inverse of transfer function. So if you have a transfer function of a system, you just take the Laplace inverse of this transfer function. In this case it will be e to the power minus 3t, and if you take integral of e to the power minus 3t from 0 to infinity, it becomes 0 plus 3, which is less than infinity. So this means that this system is BIBO stable. So in this way you can find the BIBO stability of a system using its transfer function. Alright, so next is the internal stability or Lyapunov stability. So internal stability is the property of an equilibrium point in a system, and the equilibrium point we have already defined that any value of the state vector x for which the derivative of the state vector becomes 0, which means that all the derivatives of individual state variables are simultaneously 0. So for a differential equation x dot equal f of x or x dot equal ax, equilibrium point is the solution of algebraic equation f of x equal to 0 or a times x equal to 0. So there are different categories in the internal stability or Lyapunov stability. First is the stability, the simple stability in the sense of Lyapunov. An equilibrium point x star of a system x dot equal f of x or x dot equal ax is stable or stable in the sense of Lyapunov if there exists like if for all epsilon greater than 0 there exists delta greater than 0, such that if your initial condition is close enough to, like if the distance between initial condition and the equilibrium point is less than delta, then this implies that the distance between x of t for all time and the equilibrium point will be less than epsilon, and there should be a delta for every possible epsilon. No matter how small epsilon is chosen, there should be a corresponding delta, so that if you start within delta distance from the equilibrium point, you stay within epsilon distance from the equilibrium point. So this can be understood with the help of a diagram. So for example, let us consider that this is a one-dimensional system, x of t versus time, and then this is the equilibrium point value x star. This horizontal black line is the equilibrium point value, and this is the epsilon neighborhood of the equilibrium point in which you want to confine the trajectory of the system. So stability requires that there should exist a corresponding delta neighborhood, so that if you start within the delta neighborhood, your trajectory stays within the epsilon neighborhood. So this is the epsilon neighborhood of the equilibrium point, and this is the delta neighborhood of the equilibrium point. So if you start within the delta neighborhood, you should be guaranteed to stay within epsilon. So for every epsilon, no matter how small the epsilon is, there must exist a corresponding delta, so that if you start within delta, you stay within epsilon. So this is the requirement of stability, and if you want to find the stability or calculate the stability of a system using this definition, then you have to test all possible epsilons, and all possible epsilons are infinite. So it is very difficult to analyze the stability of a system using the definition of the stability. So we have different methods that we will discuss in a few slides about how to determine the stability of LTI systems. So the crux or the summary of stability definition is that if you start close enough to the equilibrium point, then you stay close enough to the equilibrium point. Then there is asymptotic stability. The equilibrium point of a system is asymptotically stable in the sense of Lyapunov if it is stable, and additionally it has the property that if there exists some eta value greater than 0, such that if you start within the eta distance from the equilibrium point, then you actually converge to the equilibrium point. This is called attractivity. So asymptotic stability is stability plus attractivity. So attractivity, eta is basically the radius of attractivity. If you start within this radius of attractivity, you are attracted towards the equilibrium point. And stability, simple stability requires that if you start close enough, you stay close enough. But the additional requirement that if you start within certain limit, then you not only stay close enough, you actually converge to the equilibrium point. So this can be depicted with the help of this diagram. So if you start within eta distance from the equilibrium point, you can actually converge to the equilibrium point with the passage of time. Temporarily you might be going away, but eventually you converge to the equilibrium point. And this is called region of attraction. And then there is global asymptotic stability. If the region of attraction is infinite, so if you converge to the equilibrium point regardless of your point of starting, then your system is called, your equilibrium point is referred to as globally asymptotically stable. So for linear systems, if your system is a linear system, then asymptotic stability implies global asymptotic stability. You cannot have asymptotic stability or in a linear system that has a finite region of attraction. Finite region of attraction is only possible in non-linear systems. For linear systems, if there is any linear of attraction, it is always infinite. Alright, then there is example of determination of stability. So for example, let's suppose you have a transfer function here. You can determine the stability of this transfer function by calculating the poles of the transfer function. In this case, this transfer function has 4 poles. This particular the denominator, so the poles of the transfer function are roots of its denominator. So in this case, denominator is already presented in factored form, which basically brings out its poles very easily. So here there is a pole at -2, there is a pole at -3, and then there are 2 poles at -1 plus j and -1 minus j. So all the poles have negative real parts. So real part of this pole is -1 and -1, which is negative, and this pole itself is a real pole. So real part is negative and real part is negative. So all the real parts are negative. This means that this system is asymptotically stable. This means that this system will not only have the stability, but it will also have infinite region of attraction. No matter where you start in this system, the natural dynamics of the system will always converge to the equilibrium point. Then there is another system, 1 over s into s plus 1. This system has 2 poles. One pole is at 0 and another pole is at -1. So the pole at 0 is on the j omega axis and the other pole is in the left half plane. So this system is not asymptotically stable, but this system is simple stable in the sense of Lyapunov, because the poles are in closed left half plane. Closed left half plane means the left half plane plus the j omega axis. If the real parts are less than or equal to 0, then the system is stable in the sense of Lyapunov. But you have to take care that there should be no repetition of poles on the j omega axis. For example, in this system we have 3 poles. 2 poles are at the same location on the j omega axis, so there is a repetition of poles on the j omega axis, and another pole is on the left hand side. So this system is unstable because there are repeated poles on the j omega axis. Similarly, take another transfer function, and this transfer function has poles at -1, -2 and +3, because this s minus 3 will have a root at +3. So this will, even if one of the pole is in the right half plane, or even if one of the pole has positive real part, then the system will be unstable. So this means that the output of the system will go to infinity as time approaches infinity, and this, or at least the output, will not be bounded. It cannot be contained arbitrarily close to the equilibrium point. So in linear systems, the instability means that the output will go to the infinity, but in non-linear system you can have an unstable equilibrium point without having the output going to the infinity. But in linear systems, if the linear system is unstable, the output will always go to infinity. So this is how you determine the stability. And in case of state space, you determine the eigenvalues of the A matrix, which is same as the poles of the transfer function. If the eigenvalues have a negative real part, system is asymptotically stable, and same rules applies to the eigenvalues as apply to the poles of the because when you convert a transfer function into state space, the poles of the transfer function becomes eigenvalues of the A matrix, and similarly when you convert state space into transfer function, the eigenvalues of the A matrix become the poles of the transfer function. So poles of the transfer function representation is exactly the same as eigenvalues of the A matrix in state space representation. So relationship between different types of stability. Asymptotic, if a system is asymptotic stable, then it is understood that it will also be bibostable. You don't have to calculate bibostability for an asymptotic stable system. Similarly, asymptotic stability implies simple stability in the sense of Lyapunov, but if a system is simple stable or stable in the sense of Lyapunov, you cannot conclude anything about the bibostability of that system. Similarly, if a system is bibostable, you cannot conclude anything about the stability of that system. So bibostability does not imply asymptotic stability. So this is the diagram. Asymptotic stability implies bibo and asymptotic stability implies stability. BIBO does not imply asymptotic, stability does not imply asymptotic, and simple stability and BIBO stability do not imply each other. So do not imply means they do not give any information about the other type of stability. If you know BIBO stability of the system, you have no information about the internal stability of the system. But if you know asymptotic stability, and if the system is asymptotically stable, then you know for sure that the system will automatically be BIBO and stable in the sense of Lyapunov. So these are the relationship between different types of stability in a system that we have already discussed in the course, and today we are reviewing that concept. Next thing that we discussed in the course was Routh-Hurwitz stability criteria. So it is not easy in general to calculate the poles of the transfer function or the eigenvalues of the A matrix, because the transfer function, if the transfer function is of higher order and if it is not factorizable in an easy manner, then it is very difficult to calculate all the roots of higher order polynomials. And also if the matrix is of higher order, it is not very easy to find the eigenvalues of the higher order matrices. So there is a Routh-Hurwitz stability criteria which gives us information about the stability of an LTI system without having to calculate the poles of the transfer function or without having to calculate the eigenvalues of the A matrix. So what is this Routh-Hurwitz criteria? It has two conditions. First is the necessary condition. Necessary condition says that the sign of all the coefficients of the characteristic polynomial of a transfer function or a matrix must be same. So for a matrix, the characteristic polynomial is determinant of lambda I minus a, and for a transfer function, the characteristic polynomial is simply the denominator of the transfer function. So all the coefficients of the transfer function must have the same sign. If any coefficients have different signs, then you are guaranteed that the system cannot be asymptotically stable. It could still be stable in the sense of Lyapunov, or it could still be BIBO stable, but Routh-Hurwitz criteria mostly tells you about the asymptotic stability. Or sometimes in some cases it also tells about the stable systems in the sense of Lyapunov, but in general, if the necessary condition is not met, then that means that system at least cannot be asymptotically stable. Similarly, sufficient condition is that the signs of all the determinants in the first column of Routh-Hurwitz table must have same sign, must be same. So the determinants of Routh table we have already seen in the course. We shall revise this today in this lecture as well. If the signs of the determinants are same in the Routh table, then all the poles are in open left half plane and the system is asymptotically stable. If some of the determinant have different sign than the others, then the system is unstable, and the number of poles in the open right half plane in the system is equal to number of sign changes from top to bottom in the first column of the determinants in Routh table. This we have already discussed, and we shall see it again today with the help of an example. So for example, let us consider the LTI system transfer function. This is the sixth order transfer function where characteristic polynomial is s to the power 6 plus 2s to the power 5 and 3s raised to the power 4, 4s cube plus 5s square plus 6s plus 7, and we wish to determine the stability property. And you can see that all the coefficients in this characteristic polynomial are positive. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 all positive, and so we can, necessary condition is satisfied, so we can construct the Routh-Hurwitz table and check the condition. So this is the characteristic polynomial repeated on the next slide, and we construct the Routh-Hurwitz table in such a way that we formulate one row for each power of s. So for each, so s to the power 6 has a single row to itself, then there is another row for s to the power 5 and so on up to s to the power 0. So constant term has its own row. So these are the number of rows in the Routh-Hurwitz table. Then there are number of columns. So columns are filled in such a way that in the first column of first column and first row, you substitute the coefficient of s to the power 6, the coefficient of highest power of s in the polynomial, and then you leave out the next coefficient and you fill in the coefficient of the next power. So there is a coefficient of s to the power 6, you leave out the next and you plug in the coefficient of the s to the power 4 in the next column of the first row. Similarly, you leave out s cube and you plug in the coefficient of s square in the third place, and then you leave out s6, the simple s, and you plug in the constant coefficient in the next column of the first row. In this way you complete the first row by plugging in alternate coefficients of the powers of s. Then in the second row you start with the coefficient of s raised to the power 5, the coefficient of the second highest power of s in the characteristic polynomial, and in the same way as before, as you did for the first row, you leave out the next coefficient and plug in the next to next, which is the coefficient of s cube, and similarly you leave out the next coefficient, which is the coefficient of s square, and you plug in the coefficient of s. Then you leave out this 7, and after this 7 there is nothing, so you fill in the row with a 0 value. Whenever there is nothing to fill in, you by default plug in the 0 value. And this is how you populate the first two rows of the Raut-Hurwitz table. And next is the third row. The third row cannot be populated in the same way that we have populated the first two rows. Next row is populated with the help of calculation. So first entry in the row of S4 will be 2 multiplied by 3 minus 1 multiplied by 4 divided by 2. So this entry will be A, which will be sort of, it is called the Raut-Hurwitz determinant, which is similar to a matrix determinant but in the opposite direction. So if this was a 2 by 2 matrix, its determinant will be 1 into 4 minus 2 into 3. But in case of Raut-Hurwitz, it is opposite. It is 2 into 3 minus 1 into 4, and also there is a division by this first element of the second row, which is 2. So A in this case will be 2 into 3 minus 1 into 4 divided by 2, which in this case turn out to be 1. So similarly you can calculate the next entry in the second row, which is 2 into 5 minus 1 into 6 divided by 2, which we denote here by B, and B in this case is 2 into 5 minus 1 into 6 divided by 2, which turns out to be a positive value of 2. Similarly we continue in this fashion, and the next entry in this row will be 2 multiplied by 7 into 1 multiplied by 0 divided by 2, which will be 7 itself. So as we have discussed earlier in this course, that whenever something has a 0 underneath it in the Raut-Hurwitz table, this quantity comes as it is in the previous column of the next row. So next there is nothing to fill in here, so we fill this column of the third row with 0 value. Then we calculate C with the help of A into 4 minus 2 into B divided by A. So A is 1, B is 2, so plug in the value, C turns out to be 0. And we already know how to deal with the case when Raut-Hurwitz table encounters 0 in the first column. So if there is a 0 in the first column of the Raut-Hurwitz table, this is special case 1, and in case of special case 1, you replace 0 with an arbitrarily small number epsilon, and you are free to choose the sign of this epsilon. You can choose it to be positive or negative, it will not affect the results. So in this case, because all the other determinants are positive, so we choose epsilon to be a positive number, but it is a very very small positive number. So similarly we calculate D with the help of A into 6 minus 2 into 7 divided by A, and D turns out to be minus 8. And then we continue, there is nothing to fill in, and so we fill the remaining row with zeros. and then there is E is C into B, which is epsilon into B, and B here is 2, so 2 epsilon minus A into D divided by epsilon. So this is E 2 epsilon plus 8 over epsilon. And here you can see that since epsilon is a very very small number, 2 epsilon plus 8 is almost equal to 8 itself. So and 8 divided by epsilon here is a very 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 large positive number. So the next is C into 7 minus A into 0 divided by C, which is 7 itself. It comes down here, and the next remaining row is zeros. And similarly the final row is E into D minus C into 7 divided by E, which is F. So this is E into D minus C into 7, which approximately turns out to be minus 8. If you take epsilon to be nearly 0, then it is very close to minus 8, because this C is epsilon, which is nearly 0, so this term goes away. ED divided by E is a D itself, and D is minus 8, so this way F becomes minus 8. And then we fill in the remaining row with zeros, because there is nothing here to nothing more to calculate. And then 7 here is F into 7 minus E into 0 divided by F, which is 7 itself. And so this is complete. So now we have completed the route table, and this is the row, first column of the route table. And in this column you can see that this is positive, 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 and this E is also positive, but F is negative. So this F is negative, so there is a sign change. And there is again 7 is positive, so there is another sign change. So from E to F there is a sign change from positive to negative, and from F to 7 there is a sign change from negative to again positive. So all the coefficients are positive except for one coefficient here in the middle. So there are two sign changes. One sign change is from E to F, and another sign change is from F to 7. So two sign changes means that this polynomial has total 6 poles, among which 2 of the poles are in right half plane and the remaining 4 poles are in open left half plane. So this is the result that we get from the Routh-Hurwitz criteria. So again, Routh-Hurwitz criteria requires all the coefficients to be of the same sign and all the determinants to be of the same sign. If this F were a positive number, then this whole column would be positive, and we would conclude that all the 6 poles are in the open left half plane and the system is asymptotically stable. But this is not the case here. There is a quantity F which is negative, so there is a sign change from E to F and then from F to 7. So this system is unstable, and there are 2 poles in the open right half plane and 4 poles are in the left half plane. So this was the review of Routh-Hurwitz, and next is we summarize the special cases and some shortcuts related to Routh-Hurwitz. There is a shortcut to find the stability of second order system using the Routh-Hurwitz criteria, and that shortcut we have discussed that the necessary condition is enough for a second order system. So if you are given a second order system, you just look at the coefficients of its denominator, and if all the coefficients have same sign, you don't need to construct route table. You can straight away that both the poles of the second order system are in open left half plane. And similarly, if there are sign changes, there are different signs in the coefficients, then you can predict whether both the poles are in right half plane or one of the pole is in the right half plane. So if the sign change is at the end, so if the coefficient of S square is of different sign, or if the constant coefficient is of different sign, then only one pole will be on the right hand side, right half plane. And if the coefficient of S is having different sign than the coefficient of S square and the constant coefficient, then the second order system will have both the poles in the right half plane. Similarly, there is a shortcut for third order systems. If the third order system has a polynomial of this type, then the product of coefficient of S square and coefficient of S must be greater than the product of coefficient of S cube and the constant coefficient for the system to be asymptotically stable. And in addition to this condition, of course, all of these four coefficients must also have same sign. So for third order system, the Routh-Hurwitz criteria shortcut is that all the coefficients must have same sign and this product should be greater than this product. Then there is a special case that we have encountered in the previous example, that if there is a 0 in the first column of the Routh-Hurwitz table, replace the 0 in the first column of the table with infinitesimally small number, and you can choose the sign of infinitesimally small number as you want, positive or negative. Note that you can go back to the previous example and see for yourself that if we had chosen epsilon to be a small negative number, the conclusion would still be that 4 poles are in the left half plane and 2 poles are in the right half plane. Then there is a special case 2 from where the whole row of the Routh table becomes 0. If the whole row of the Routh table becomes 0, then you pick the row above the 0 row and form the auxiliary equation and insert the derivative of auxiliary equation in the table in place of 0 row, and then complete the table as usual, and then add the roots of auxiliary equation in the calculations of stability. So if those roots of the auxiliary equation are in the right half plane, then the system will become unstable. Actually, the roots of the auxiliary equation will be the actual roots of the system. So in special case 2, you end up actually calculating some of the roots of the actual polynomial, and the other roots you can tell about them without calculating them using the Routh's table. Okay, so these are the 4 steps that you have to perform. We did an example of this case 2 when we discussed the Routh-Hurwitz lecture in this course. Next is that we can also design a controller using the Routh-Hurwitz stability criteria, and we have already discussed an example during the course. I will repeat that example as a review here. So we have a given transfer function which is of 4th order transfer function, and we wish to design a controller for this transfer function to achieve closed loop stability. So we want this system to be closed loop asymptotically stable. You can see that here this system cannot be closed loop stable because there is a pole at s equal to 0. So there is a pole at j omega axis, so we need to design a controller for the system so that the feedback system is asymptotically stable. So first we try the P controller, and if we use the P controller, then the closed loop transfer function has this following denominator. We have already discussed this previously, how you calculate this denominator. So this is c into g over 1 plus c into g, and this is the denominator of c into g over 1 plus c into g, which can also be calculated with the shortcut that this denominator is the denominator of c into g, which is this thing, s to the power 4 plus s cube plus s square plus s, and the plus numerator is kp into 1, which is kp. So denominator plus numerator is the denominator of the closed loop system. Necessary condition it can be achieved for this polynomial if kp is greater than 0. And now we look at the sufficient condition for which we construct the Routh table. The coefficient of s to the power 4 comes here, then s square coefficient comes in the next place, and the constant coefficient comes in the next place, and similarly the coefficient of s cube comes in the next row, then the coefficient of s, and then there is a 0 for filling in. Then we calculate and we encounter 0 in the first place of this table. We replace this 0 with a small number epsilon, and we continue our calculations. So in this case we find that the coefficients, the condition is that a is epsilon minus kp over epsilon. So since epsilon is arbitrarily small, there is no value of kp which can make A to be there is no positive value of Kp which can make A to be positive, because Kp has to be positive to satisfy necessary condition, and since epsilon is the smallest possible positive number, there is no other positive number that can be smaller than epsilon. So we basically Kp there is no value of Kp that can make this system asymptotically stable. So P controller cannot make the system asymptotically stable, so we have to try another controller. In this case we try PD controller. In PD controller, the transfer function, the closed loop characteristic equation becomes s to the power 4 plus s cube plus s square plus s into 1 plus kd plus kp. So here there is an addition of a kd term in the coefficient of s, and for achieving necessary condition, we must have Kp greater than 0, and we must have Kd greater than -1, because 1 minus 1 is 0, so we have to have this coefficient greater than 0. So if Kd is greater than -1, then for example if Kd is minus 0.5, then 1 minus 0.5 is still plus 0.5, so necessary condition will still be met. So now we look at the sufficient condition. We build the Routh-Hurwitz table, and we see that the A and B are given by this these expressions. A is equal to minus Kd. So for A to be positive, Kd has to be negative, but Kd cannot be more negative than, so Kd can only be between 0 and -1. So if you choose any value of Kd between 0 and -1, you can find the corresponding value of Kp such that B becomes positive. For example, if you choose Kd to be minus 0.5, then the corresponding value of Kp turns out to be 0.1, which results in A to be 0.5 plus and B to be plus 0.55. So this achieves closed loop asymptotic stability. So your controller will be 0.1 minus 0.5s. So 0.1 minus 0.5s will be your PD controller, which will make this system asymptotically stable. This was a controller design using Routh-Hurwitz. Same example that we have discussed during the course. I have included this into the review of the course as well. So then there is performance analysis. This is the next topic that we discussed in this course, performance analysis of control systems. So analysis of feedback system will have two basic types: stability analysis and performance analysis. So far we have discussed stability analysis with the help of root locus and with the help of calculation of poles and eigenvalues of the system. Now we are on to the performance analysis of feedback systems. In performance analysis, there is the analysis of reference tracking performance, and there is an analysis of disturbance rejection performance. In the previous lecture, the first part of the review of the course, I told you that we are not discussing disturbance rejection in this course, or the trade-off between noise and disturbance. That is discussed in the graduate level courses in control systems. But we are going to discuss the reference tracking, and in reference tracking the performance has two types: the steady state performance and the transient performance. The steady state performance is characterized by steady state error, and transient performance is characterized by different quantities such as percentage overshoot, rise time, settling time, and time delay, and so on. So we shall be looking at both of these types of performances. So this, I have enclosed this into the red box because we are going to discuss this in the course. We already have discussed these in the course. I am just going to review these performance analysis in the review of the course. So first I will be reviewing the steady state response or steady state performance. If you have a feedback system of this type and you assume h of s equal 1, which we do in this course, then the expression for the error is the transfer function between the error and the desired input is 1 over 1 plus cs into gs multiplied by, so this, the transfer function is es divided by y ds, But if you take the YDS from the denominator on the left hand side onto the right hand side, then this becomes the expression for the error in the system. So we are interested in the steady state of the error. For a well designed system, the error should go to 0 with the passage of time. So this again, the diagram is repeated, the expression of the error is repeated, but now I will be discussing the different types of the input. Input means the desirable values of the output of the system. Following are the standard inputs. So there is a step input, in which case you want to make this output of the system to be constant value alpha. The transfer function of step input is alpha over s, where alpha is a positive constant. Then there could be a ramp input, whose transfer function is alpha over s square. Ramp input is a straight ramp, a straight line with some slope, and then there is a parabolic input, which is like a curve, a second order curve, and the parabolic input has a transfer function alpha over s cube. So these are standard inputs that you can apply to the LTI systems, and alpha is some constant. The steady state error, this is the expression of error, but we are interested in the steady state value, the value of error as the system settles down after the transients. And so this discussion is only valid for asymptotically stable systems, because only asymptotically stable systems have a steady state. If a system is simple stable in the sense of Lyapunov, or if a system is unstable, then it might not have a steady state at all. So steady state analysis discussion is irrelevant. Excuse me for that. Okay, so steady state error is calculated by final value theorem, and this is stated as follows. The limit t approaches infinity, as the time goes to infinity, the value of error is equal to limit s approaches 0, which is the frequency variable s. This approaches 0 into s times the value of e to the es. So this is the transfer function of e of t, which is e of s. So this is the final value theorem, that you can determine the final value of a time domain signal in frequency domain by limiting the frequency to go to 0. So here you can see that this we have plugged in this expression for e of s, and this is how you can find the steady state value of the error for different systems. So then there is a concept of system type. The system type concept is very important and very useful in determination of steady state error. The type of a the type of a closed loop system is equal to number of poles at 0 or origin in the open loop transfer function. So the type of a system is the type of a closed loop system is determined from the transfer function of the open loop system. This is very, very important point. Never forget that. The type of a closed loop system, Cs into Gs over 1 plus Cs into Gs, is determined by the poles of the open loop system, which is Cs into Gs. Okay. So closed loop system is Cs into Gs over 1 plus Cs into Gs, and open loop system is Cs into Gs. So type of this system is determined by poles of this system, and in general the type is equal to number of poles of this system at 0, at s equal to 0. So so this type is determined by counting the number of 1 over s in the G open loop. So for example, if you have Cs is equal to Kp and Gs equal 1 over s plus 1, there is no 1 over s in this system. So the type is 0. Similarly, in this system there is 1 over s here, so type is 1. In this system again 1 over s, the type is 1. In this case there is 1 over s square, so the type of this system is 2. And in this case again this 1 over s square, the type is 2. the type here is again 2. So you can see here that this is type 0, this is type 1, this is type 1, this is type 2 and type 2. So this you can see the type is not of CS into GS. The type is of CS into GS over 1 plus CS into GS, and it is being determined using the CS into GS transfer function. Then there is a conclusion of steady state error for the system of various types. So here again, this is the formula that we discussed a couple of slides ago, that the steady state error is determined by final value theorem, and this final value theorem is applicable only for asymptotically stable systems. It is not applicable for unstable systems or the systems that are not asymptotically stable, because those systems do not have steady state at all. So if you have a step input, that means YD, this YD is 1 over S or alpha over S in general. Then you can plug in the value of YD, and then the steady state error turns out to be, if the system is of type 0, then the steady state error will be alpha over 1 plus C0 G0. And if the system has type greater than equal to 1, then the steady state error with respect to step input is always 0. So this is how you calculate the steady state error for systems of different types. So you can see that in order to calculate the steady state error for the LTI systems, it is very useful to know the type of the system. If you know the type of the system, you can simply relate the type of the system with the corresponding input and determine the steady state error without doing any complicated calculations. So there is an error coefficient for step input, which is defined as S equal 0 CS into GS, which is this part in the error. So this is the error coefficient. You can see that error itself is inversely proportional to error coefficient, and error coefficient for type 0 systems is C0 G0, and for type 1 and greater systems the error coefficient is infinity. So imagine that if this was infinity, then alpha over 1 plus infinity will be 0. So that is why the steady state error is 0 for the system of type 1 and for greater types. If you want to go back and revisit the details of how we calculated this, then I refer you back to my lecture on steady state error for systems of different types, where I have derived these equations mathematically. So you can see how the steady state error for system of type 1 is actually 0, and how the steady state error for type greater than equal to 1 is 0. So steady state error for systems of various types, we continue this discussion for ramp input. The transfer function of ramp input is alpha over S square. Then the steady state error of type 0 system is infinite for ramp input, and for type 1 systems the steady state error is alpha times coefficient of S in the denominator. This is an minus 1. So remember, in the general form of transfer function, an is the constant coefficient in the denominator and bm is the constant coefficient in the numerator. So an1 minus 1 is the coefficient of S in the denominator of the closed loop transfer function. Sorry, not the closed loop transfer function, but the open loop transfer function, and this bm is the coefficient of numerator in the open loop transfer function. Similarly, the error coefficient for ramp input is limit S approaches 0 S into CS into GS. So in the coefficient of error in the step input, there is no S here. So in ramp input there is an S. So for the coefficient of ramp input is 0 for type 0 systems, and bm over an minus 1, which is inverse of this steady state error for type 1 systems, and infinity for type 2 systems or greater than type 2 systems. Similarly, for parabolic inputs, the transfer function is alpha over S cube. For parabolic inputs, if the system has type 1 or type 0, the steady state error is infinite. If the system has type 2, the steady state error is finite, and for type 3 and large and type 3 and greater types, the steady state error with respect to parabolic input is 0. and then the error coefficient is Ka, limit s approaches 0, s square into Cs into Gs, which is 0 for type 1 and type 0 systems, and finite value Bm over An minus 2, which is the An minus 2 is the coefficient of s square. So this is for type 2 systems, and coefficient is infinite for type 3 and above systems. So this was steady state error for systems of different types for different standard input signals. And then we have an example. So for example, if you have a Cs into Gs, s plus 1 over s into s square plus 2s plus 1, then we can see that this system is of type 1. But first of all, we have to determine whether this system is asymptotically stable or not. Because if this system is not asymptotically stable, then the discussion of steady state error is irrelevant. So we find the closed loop transfer function by numerator divided by denominator plus numerator. So this is s plus 1 over s cube plus 2s square plus 2s plus 2, and then asymptotically stable because this criteria is met. Here 2 into 2 is 4, which is greater than 2 into 1. So this system indeed is asymptotically stable, right? So after asymptotic stability, now since the system is type 1, we don't have to do much calculation. The steady state error with respect to unit step input for this system is 0, because this is type 1 system, and steady state error of this system with respect to ramp is alpha times coefficient of s in the open loop system, which is 1. So s into 1 is 1, and divided by the constant coefficient in the numerator of the open loop system. So here alpha is also 1 because this is unit ramp. So so the steady state error will be 1. Similarly, steady state error with respect to unit parabola is infinite, because for parabolic input, type 1 and type 0 system have infinite errors, steady state errors. So similarly, we can look at another example where this is a system of type 2, and we calculate the numerator over denominator plus numerator. This is the closed loop transfer function. You can see that 3 into 1 is greater than 1 into 1. So this system is asymptotically stable. And now since this system is type 2, the steady state error with respect to unit step is 0. Steady state error with respect to unit ramp is also 0 for type 2 systems, but steady state error with respect to parabola for type 2 systems is alpha into An minus 2, which is coefficient of s square, which is 3 in this case, divided by constant coefficient in the numerator, which is 1. And since this is unit parabola, alpha is also 1, so the error will be overall equal to 3. So these are the examples of steady state error for systems of different types. That brings me to the end of second part of course review for linear control systems. So we have so far reviewed half of the course, and the remaining half of the course we shall be reviewing in the next 2 parts of this series. And before I conclude, I will just briefly review the whole lecture of today, so that you have a quick review of what we discussed in today's lecture. So we started with the mathematical modeling for plants, modeling for sensors, and modeling for actuators. And we saw that plant modeling can be done with first principles such as Ohm law, Newton's laws, Kirchhoff laws, and other first principles. Phenomenological modeling is done when first principles are not available, and system identification is done when lab experimentation is easy to perform or it's not too expensive. And modeling of sensors is like there are constant models, delay models, and fluctuation based models which have transients and steady states. Then there are some phenomena in the sensors: saturation, dead zone, and discrete steps. Actuators for electrical engineers are mostly field control DC motor or armature control DC motor, for mechanical engineers as well. So modeling of controllers, P controller is modeled as simple gain, and PD controller is KP plus KDS, which are 1 0 in the system. PI controller has a pole at the origin and a zero in the system, so one pole and one zero. PID controller has a one pole and two zeros in the system, so it is a PD and PID both are non-causal controllers. So there is a parallel nomenclature where phase lead compensator, phase lag compensator. Phase lead is alternate of PD controller, phase lag is alternate of PI controller, and lead lag compensator is alternate of PID controller. And then there is higher order controllers, PDD. It is important to note that whenever you have a second derivative term or second integral term, the power of S increases. Similarly, if you have a third derivative term, it will come with the S cube, and if you have a third integral term, it will come with 1 over S cube. So you can have any order controllers. Then stability of LTI systems. BIBO stability requires that the output magnitude should be finite in response to finite input, and BIBO stability can be determined from the impulse response of the system, and impulse response is related to the transfer function of the system. So here is an example where you calculate BIBO stability. You can also determine BIBO stability from asymptotic stability as well. And internal stability is relevant to the equilibrium point, which is the point of the system where all the dynamics are zero. And internal stability is if you start close enough to the equilibrium point, you stay close enough for arbitrarily small neighborhoods in the equilibrium point. That is the stability. And then asymptotic stability is that you not only stay close enough, but you have additional property of attractivity. And attractivity requires that if whenever you start from an initial condition, you not only stay close enough to equilibrium point, you actually converge to the equilibrium point. Then determination of stability from the poles of the transfer function or the eigenvalues of the A matrix. And then there is a relationship between different stability types. Asymptotic stability gives information about BIBO stability and stability in the sense of Lyapunov, whereas stability in the sense of Lyapunov does not give any information about the other two. Same is the case for BIBO. BIBO does not give any information about the other two types of stability. Then there is Routh-Hurwitz criteria, necessary condition, sufficient condition. You can, without calculating the poles of the transfer function, you can find the stability, and you can also determine how many poles are in open right half plane in case the transfer function is unstable. We looked at an example of sixth order system. We constructed the Routh-Hurwitz table, and we looked at, in this particular case, it turned out that 4 of the poles were on the left half plane and 1 pole was in the right half plane. And notice that here we took epsilon to be positive number. If you take epsilon to be a negative number, then what happens is that this E, it also becomes negative. So E will become negative and F will become positive. So in this case, this 1 to A, this C and E both will be negative. So there will be a sign change from A to C, and then there will be no sign change from C to E, and then there will be a second sign change from E to F, because F will then become positive. Because epsilon is negative and also E is negative, the product of two negative numbers is positive, and a positive number divided by a negative number is negative. So then you would still have the same conclusion that 4 poles are in the left half plane and 2 poles are in the right half plane. I have been going through it very quickly. You can take your time and think about it in depth, and if you still have any questions, you can ask me in the comments. There are special cases of Routh-Hurwitz and shortcuts. For second order system, the shortcut is you just by looking at the second order transfer function, you can tell whether it is asymptotically stable or not. And for third order system, you have to do a small calculation in addition to the necessary condition. For special case 1, you replace the 0 in the first column with a small number epsilon, And for the second special case, you form an auxiliary equation, you calculate the derivative and of the auxiliary equation and plug it into the table and complete the table, and then you include the result of the roots of the auxiliary equation into the calculations of stability. Then there is controller design using Raut-Hurwitz. We looked at a transfer function of order 4. We tried to design the controller for it. We tried P controller did not work. Then we tried PD controller and it did work, and we were able to identify at least one possible PD controller which was able to asymptotically stabilize this system. Then performance analysis of LTI systems. We are going to discuss steady state and transient performance analysis. Steady state response, that is calculated by this equation in frequency domain, and there are different standard input types: step input, ramp input, and parabolic input. Similarly, this is the expression for steady state error. We use final value theorem. Given that the system is asymptotically stable, you can use this final value theorem to calculate the steady state error, but the calculation of steady state error is facilitated by the concept of system type. The type of a system or type of a closed loop system is determined by the open loop transfer function, and we count the 1 over s in the open loop transfer function to determine the type of the system. We look at certain examples of different open loop systems which give the types of corresponding closed loop systems. Then there is steady state error for systems of different types. For step input, you have type 0 system will have finite steady state error, and type 1 and above systems will have 0 steady state error. Similarly, for ramp input, type 0 system will have infinite steady state error, type 1 system will have finite steady state error, and type 2 and above system will have 0 steady state error. Similarly, for parabolic input, type 1 and type 0 system will have infinite steady state error, type 2 system will have finite steady state error, and type 3 system will have 0 steady state error. And we also looked at a couple of examples where we looked at systems of type 1 and type 2 and their steady state error with respect to step, with respect to ramp, and with respect to parabola. And this was the second example. We looked at the steady state error, but before we look at the steady state error, it is very important to determine the asymptotic stability property, because if the system is not asymptotically stable, then the discussion of steady state error is irrelevant. And that's it for now, and we shall continue the review of the course in the next part of this series. Thank you for listening.